It is always a great honor for the M&A advisor to be joined by Selig, who is a partner and co-chair of the U.S.-China corporate practice at Foley and Lardner. Selig, great to see you again.
Great to be here.
Tell us a little bit about Foley and Lardner, your law firm, and what you do specifically.
The firm is one of the oldest law firms in the United States, founded in 1840, 6 years before Wisconsin became a state. And it's really kind of built on its Midwestern strengths in terms of advanced manufacturing to really become a national and international law firm. So I co-run the China practice, and I'm actually the chief representative in China. So I divide my time pretty equally between New York and Beijing and Shanghai. So speaking at this conference today, tomorrow I fly back to Beijing for meetings, and then I'll return in 10 days' time. It's exciting.
I believe the last time I spoke with you, you told me that in the previous year you had spent about 100 days in China and then traveling throughout Asia from there.
Yeah, now it's closer to like 160, and probably I'll be spending more than half of my time in China. But that to me is important because it gives me the opportunity to meet with CEOs and senior leadership and discuss with them very directly their plans for the United States. And the fact that I spend as much time as I do, both in the United States and there, I hope I can give them a very current picture at any one point in time in terms of developments in the United States that they should be aware of, and so they can freely discuss the opportunities and challenges they have on an ongoing basis. So for me, spending the time in both places, has worked out quite nicely.
And speaking of changes, a lot to talk about with Donald Trump winning the presidency in the United States. What is the perception in China, do you believe, about that? And what changes could there be as far as investing?
Well, what's interesting, I think it's really quite unknown at this point. I think China does respect people who are strong individuals. I think the fact that he comes from a business background is something that they find to be intuitively very positive, and that his brand has been as ubiquitous and diversified as it has. It was interesting because while trade deficit was discussed during this election, but there really wasn't a discussion, for example, about foreign direct investment by China in the United States. There would have been perhaps more of that discussion, but as we know in this election, there were so many sidebar issues and personal issues that really took the limelight that the amount of serious discussion about China really did not come to the surface. So I think we're at a point right now where there is a lot of wanting to understand more and think through what will be the prospects here. I don't think anybody really at this point knows who the president-elect's foreign policy team will be and his trade representatives. I think it's safe to say that TPP is probably dead in the water, even though there were 28 sessions. The bilateral investment treaty, the BIT with China, but also TPP. I think these bilateral and or multinational agreements, which Trump has been so critical of, I think there is no possibility of enactment of either during the waning days of the Obama presidency.
Let's talk about the changes that you've seen over the last few years in China as far as the production of technology and just so many companies right now producing products.
I think in China, the number is 10,000 companies are formed every day. China is really transforming itself from made in China or manufactured in China to invented in China. And I think also in terms of outbound investment has become a big priority for the government and for the country generally to access additional technology, state-of-the-art technology that the United States, Europe, and others have, to become a global player, to access and to establish brands outside of China itself. Because I think the Chinese economy is slowing, as it is not any longer the lowest cost manufacturing environment, moving up in the value chain, both in China and Chinese companies outside of China, is a really big priority here. And I think what's encouraging is that the FDI, the foreign direct investment in the United States and elsewhere, is being led by POEs, privately owned enterprises. So the SOEs, state-owned enterprises, that were the first wave of that acquisition or investment frenzy 10 years ago, maybe even as recently as 5 years ago, that was kind of resource-driven. Now the investments are in high-tech, in advanced manufacturing, in consumer products, in healthcare, in advanced systems. So, this will have a very positive effect to China as it really tries to modernize their healthcare, their agricultural production, all these aspects of making a more efficient society.
Is the trend still continuing with a great deal of people moving from the rural areas into the urban areas for work?
It's now gone. I think now the tipping point was a few years ago where more than 50% now live in an urban environment, and I think that number is now over 52%. But I think they want to get that number to, say, 70%. So that process will continue. The challenge, of course, is to create the jobs for those individuals. And China does not have a system yet where benefits can be transferable from one part of the country to the next. And you also have the land registration, so that it is not easy if you're a resident of one province to buy in a second province. So there's a need, I think, to develop, and they're doing it piecemeal, national standards, so that people in the United States, people go where the job opportunities are. If there is a job opportunity in Houston, people will pick up and leave Atlanta to go there. In China, that's not yet the case. And so it confines people, for the most part, to the eastern provincial cities. And I think the whole thrust in China right now is to diversify more nationally as well, open up to Western China far more as well. That requires the whole building of infrastructure, because unless you have, same as the United States, unless you can have confidence that your kids will be educated in a good environment, that you'll have the right type of health care, and that you'll have the type of benefits, culturally or otherwise, it's hard to make that move. So China is making strides in that direction.
And as we look towards the future, the end of 2016 into 17, do you think the robust investing by the Chinese into the U.S. will continue?
I think it will. I think for the first time in history, China is #1 on the cross-border M&A charts. David Ferguson cited today a statistic that through the third quarter of this year, China had $198 billion in outbound investment. Approximately 22% of that is finding its way in the United States. We've already exceeded, even at the end of the second quarter this year, the amount of total investment of $15.3 billion last year in the United States. What I think we're finding is two things: buying companies and investing in companies, and also greenfield projects as well. So there's like today, there's something like $9-10 billion in greenfield projects, where Yangfeng and automotive and other companies are actually building new plants and new facilities here in the United States. So it's good for job creation in the United States. And of course, there's that constant tension between CFIUS and the national security issues, as well as the bilateral nature. I think we're going to find in the United States more of an insistence that Chinese markets be as open to U.S. companies as U.S. markets are to Chinese companies. And as we know, in many areas in China, you still have that restricted list, whether it be in areas of education, agriculture, TMT, which make it very difficult for U.S. companies to compete in China on the same footing. I think a tone of the new administration will be to insist and strongly advocate. Not that it has been advocated to now, because, as I mentioned, the bilateral investment treaty discussions had 28 rounds of negotiation with a narrowing of the restricted list from China. But still, it is not as robust as it needs to be. And I think that inequity is something that the voters in the U.S. have been reacting to as well.
Selig, always wonderful to hear your insight. Thank you so much for joining us.
Pleasure.